Welcome to the second video in our free video series on staying focused and getting rid of frustration at work, brought to you by Schedule Focus. I'm your host, Mac. In our first video, we learned from Stephen King that the secret to being productive at work is getting your process right. In this video, we're going to talk about how things go wrong. We all know that interruptions are a problem, but I'm going to show you that they're actually way worse than you think. Scientists at UC Irvine studied office workers to understand how interruptions affected their work, and what they found will shock you. 57% of all tasks are interrupted in a typical office environment, and it takes 25.5 minutes on average to resume an interrupted task. That is, if the task is resumed on the same day at all. Because 22.8% of interrupted tasks are delayed at least one day. How long are they delayed? Well, we don't know, because the researchers had to go home. If these numbers don't shock you, they should. Let's do some quick math to show what these numbers mean in real life. Let's say you have 10 items on your to-do list for the day. In an 8-hour day, that gives you 45 minutes for each task, plus a half hour for lunch. But because more than half of those items will be interrupted, on average, that means you'll spend 6 times 25.5, or 153 minutes, or about 2.5 hours a day, just dealing with those interruptions. That's almost a third of every workday. But what's worse is that you'll then spend a bunch of time remembering what you were doing before you were interrupted. And only then can you start doing productive work again on your tasks. Let's say it takes you 15 minutes to get refocused on what you were doing after an interruption. On average, that's another hour and a half gone. Together with the time you spent dealing with the interruptions themselves, you've now lost a full half of your 8-hour day to the interruptions. After you take 30 minutes for lunch, you're now down to only 20 minutes for each 45-minute task. That's a recipe for stress, low productivity, and frustration. Now here's where you might think that this isn't a problem for you, because you can multitask. Unfortunately, I'm here to tell you that you are bad at multitasking, and that multitasking is bad for you. Researchers from the University of Oregon found that people who multitask are less selective in what they allow into working memory, they less accurately update the contents of working memory, and they switch between tasks more slowly than non-multitaskers. On top of this, the more multitasking you do, the worse you get at it. Studies show that people overestimate their skill at multitasking. 70% think they are above average. Multitasking is also a form of productivity pollution. A person focusing on a single task, who can see other people multitasking, gets less work done than a person who can't see those multitaskers. Now that we know that multitasking isn't the answer, let's take a look at interruptions a little more closely. There are 3 kinds of interruptions: distractions, life, and other work. Of these, the worst sort of interruption by far is other work. Distractions, we all know are bad. Loud coworkers, cat videos on the internet, etc. don't help productivity. Private offices or working remotely are good ways to cut down on distractions. More importantly, when it's time to bear down and focus, it's always at least possible to refuse to be distracted. And sometimes life happens. If a child is sick or something important happens unexpectedly in your personal life, sometimes you need to drop everything to deal with it. That's life. And nobody should feel guilty about attending to those important issues when they happen. Other work, on the other hand, is a really deadly kind of interruption. It's often urgent, and many times you can't just ignore it or put it on the back burner. When you get called into a crisis status meeting to talk about Bob's project, telling him that you're really in the flow working on your presentation probably isn't going to get you out of going to that meeting. But what can we do about these other work interruptions? In our next video, we'll show you how other work gets out of control and what you can do about it.